Okay, so in this last video over chapter 9, we're going to be looking at questions 11 through 13. And what these are really dealing with is payroll taxes. And so we're going to kind of look at this, and this is the information that we're going to be using for each one of these. And so we'll deal with that as we need to. So let's just look here. So in this first section, it tells us we need to compute amounts for each of these 4 taxes as applied to the employee's gross earnings for the month of September under each of 3 separate situations. These are A, B, and C. And so if you scroll back up here, you'll see in this given information that we have indeed 3 scenarios, A, B, and C. So instead of having to constantly roll back up to here, what I've done is I've just copied that information down to the bottom of this page so we can easily reference it. Now the first thing I'm going to suggest that you do is to actually create a new column over here to the right called gross pay through September. And if you do this, it's going to help us out as we build down through these tables and figuring out where exactly these numbers come from. So I'm going to be off about a line or two because of the way the writing is lining up. But just know all we're doing here is for letter A, we're just taking the sum of the gross pay through August plus the gross pay for September, and that'll give us the gross pay through September. So for scenario A, we have $7,500. For scenario B, we have $5,600. And for scenario C, I'm going to need to use a calculator real quick, and that'll be $123,600 plus 9,500, which gives us $133,100. And so we've got our gross pay through September for each one of these, and we'll see what these numbers affect and how this ends up working out as we work through this question. So if we look at situation A, we see Social Security, and we see if we're doing this for September, these are the amounts we're really looking at in this box right here. But we've got to consider these cumulative amounts to see if there's any kind of limitation that must be applied. So for FICA, for Social Security, the phase out for Social Security occurs. So the Social Security max is $128,400 per employee. Now, the maximum for Medicare is what? Well, if you watched the last video, hopefully you remember that there is no maximum for your Medicare, which means that you're going to pay that 1.45% on every dollar you earn, regardless of how much you make. Whereas this 6.2% that you see for your Social Security tax, that only gets paid on the first $128,400 you earn. So if you earn enough money, you'll actually pay more in Medicare taxes than Social Security taxes because there's no limit on the amount that can be taxed under Medicare. So now that we've rehashed that real quick, we're going to look at this one more time. So for situation A, we see that we had gross pay for September of $1,500. So all we're going to do is we're going to drop that straight in here for both of these two items, for your Social Security and for your Medicare. And the reason we know we can tax this full amount, this full $1,500 for Social Security, is because we did this gross pay through September column that shows we're only at $7,500 in gross pay. And we just said that we can pay Social Security taxes on up to $128,400. So since that's the case, what that means is that we've actually got plenty of wages left to be taxed under these Social Security wages. So we're going to go ahead and apply that full $1,500. So when you do that, you'll take your $1,500 times your 6.2% for your Social Security, and that'll give you $93. And you'll take $1,500 times 1.45%, and that'll give you $2,175 for your Medicare. So now what we've got to look at is, well, what about these federal and state unemployment taxes? So the question here is, can am I going to pay this full $1,500 towards these taxes? So let's review the information they gave us real quick and see what it tells us. So if we look in these two lines right here, it tells us BMX Company has 1 employee. FICA Social Security taxes are 6.2% of the first $128,400 paid to its employees, and FICA Medicare taxes are 1.45% of gross pay. Now for BMX, FUTA taxes are 0.6% and SUTA taxes are 5.4% of the first $7,000 paid to its employees. So what that tells me is if I have an employee who's made more than $7,000, I'm not going to be able to pay these federal and state unemployment taxes on the full amount. Now this is an incentive to companies to keep employees on for longer periods of time, because what we're going to do is say if you are constantly turning over employees, you're going to have to be repaying these federal and state unemployment taxes on that first $7,000 over and over and over. However, if you only keep 1 employee for a significant period of time, then once you've hit that $7,000 wage limit for the year, you don't pay any more federal or state unemployment taxes associated with that employee. So it gives you this incentive to prevent companies from just letting go of employees left and right. So let's see. Are we going to be able to use the full $1,500 that we use for Social Security and Medicare for FUTA and SUTA? And the answer, of course, is no. Because we said the maximum amount that I can pay for federal and state unemployment on an employee is $7,000. And if we look at our gross pay through August 31st, we've already paid $6,000, or we've paid this on $6,000 worth of wages rather, which tells me there's only $1,000 worth of wages left that can be taxed. So now the question is $1,000 less than or equal to $1,500? And the answer is yes. Because if $1,000 had been more than what we had actually paid, it wouldn't matter, right? If we'd only paid $800 in wages, then what we would have seen is that $800 would have been fully taxed for FUTA and SUTA, and it would have only left $200 for the next period. But in this case, the wages paid exceeded, so the wages paid of $1,500 exceeded what we needed to max out the FUTA and SUTA taxes. So be very careful. Make sure you don't pull down that $1,500 straight away. And you've got now your $1,000 that is taxed here. Okay? So hopefully, I know that was a lot of moving pieces, but hopefully now that we've gone through it, you can kind of see how that worked and understand why that is the way that it is. So now we're going to move on to the next situation. So once you've got those $1,000 in there, it's just a matter of multiplying it out. So 1,000 times 0.6 will give you 6, and 1,000 times 5.4 will give you 54. All right. Of course, I'm speaking in percentages, not just decimals. Okay, so it's 0.6% and 5.4%. Okay. So now in the next situation, in situation B, we're going to do something very similar. But what we're going to see here is in this case, the full amount paid in September is subject to tax in all 4 cases. And you say, well, why is that? And the reason, of course, is that the gross pay through September is below all of our thresholds. So it's below the $7,000 for FUTA and SUTA, and it's well below the $128,400 max for Social Security. So all we're going to do is pull through this full $2,850 that we see right here. And we're going to drop that in each of these 4 boxes. Then we're going to apply the tax rates to their respective amounts. And we're going to calculate the amount of tax for each item, just the same as we did above. Okay? But in this case, there was no phase out that had to be considered. So in the last case, what we're going to look at now is whenever our gross pay is sufficiently large that now we've maxed out Social Security. So in this case, what we see is my gross pay through August the 31st was $123,600. But we said that Social Security max occurs at $128,400. And we've already paid Social Security taxes on wages of $123,600. And that comes from right here. Okay? Which tells me that the amount left is just $4,800 that we can pay Social Security taxes on. And so that $4,800 will just pull straight through to that FICA Social Security box. So what about that $4,700 that's left, right? So we've got $9,500 in total gross pay for September, but we're only paying taxes for Social Security purposes on $4,800. So what happens to the remaining $4,700? Well, it's just not taxed, right? It's not taxed in terms of Social Security. Please do not misunderstand and think this is not taxed for income or other taxes. Of course it is. But as far as the Social Security tax is concerned, it's done once we've hit this maximum amount of $128,400. So this $4,700 goes through unfazed from the Social Security tax. Okay. So now that we've got that done, now we can look at what is left. So we've now figured out how much of this has to be paid through Social Security taxes, but how much of this $9,500 gets hit with the Medicare tax? Well, do we apply this $128,400 limit that we talked about earlier? Of course not, because that only applies to our Social Security. Right now, we're dealing with Medicare, and we said Medicare has no maximum, which means that regardless of how much money you make, that 1.45% is paid on every single dollar. And sure enough, we see that right here. So we made $9,500 in September, and all $9,500 is being taxed for Medicare purposes. Okay? So hopefully that one was fairly straightforward. Okay. Now, you say, well, why are FUTA and SUTA 0? Well, the same rules apply for FUTA and SUTA that we saw earlier. Well, FUTA and SUTA, they max at $7,000. And if you have made $123,000 prior to this pay period, have you made more than $7,000? Of course you have. And if you've made more than $7,000, then you pay no federal and state unemployment taxes on those wages. And so that carries us through the end of number 11. Okay? So now we will move on to number 12. And with number 12, what we're going to look at is exactly how we are going to show this in a table form. So it tells us here, assume situation A and prepare the employer's September 30th journal entries to record salaries, expense, and the related payroll liabilities for this employee. The employee's federal income taxes withheld by the employer are $70 for this pay period. So, unlike earlier where we had to actually look up this withholding rate on that table, here they were nice enough to just tell us how much was withheld. Please know how to work with the table. Please know how to use it if it is given to you in a question. Okay, I'm not sure how it'll show up on your exam just yet, but you should be familiar with it both ways. So the first thing we've got to look at is what taxes are being withheld. So the federal income tax was nice enough, they just gave it to us. So we'll just pull that down and drop it in. Then for Social Security, if we scroll back up to the prior page, what we'll see is for Social Security, we had $1,500 in wages. And if you need that explanation again, feel free to rewind this and go back up there. But I'm not going to explain it again just for the sake of saving some time for us. But then we also had that same $1,500 for Medicare. So in situation A, we're just going to pull those numbers straight down through, and you'll notice the 93 and the 2175 are the same numbers that we calculated in number 11. So no big change there. Now, the next part of this question deals with the general journal. Because I did not pull that page in, I have instead opted to just show you what would have been on that page down here in this section. So in this section, the first thing we're going to do is book salaries, expenses, a debit for the full $1,500 that we have in number 11 that tells us how much was paid. Right here for gross pay for September, and it's also right down here. So wherever you want to get that from is fine. I have included it at the bottom of this page for your convenience as well. So we'll pull in that full $1,500 in salaries expense, but we know we cannot right away go and credit salaries payable for the $1,500. If I did so, I would be neglecting all of these taxes that must also be paid. So instead, I first have to come in and credit my Social Security tax payable for FICA, then my Medicare tax payable for FICA, and finally, my employee federal income tax payable, right? So that will be my last credit. Now, I've abbreviated income tax as IT just for the sake of getting this to fit on the page, so please don't let that confuse you. Then, the last number we actually get here is salaries payable, and it's really just a plug to make this thing balance. So if you want to see it another way, right, this is just $1,500 less $93 less $21.75 less $70, and that will give you the $1,315.25 that you see here. So that's all we're doing, is we're just getting this journal entry to balance. Hopefully something we've been doing for the vast majority of this semester. So hopefully that piece makes sense. Even if some of these accounts are new and you're struggling with the names, just be aware they do tend to be the same. So hopefully, if you look at this enough and you practice it some, hopefully you'll get familiar with it and you'll be able to handle it on the test. Once again, and I didn't mention this in 11, so I'm going to go back real quick and just mention this. If you get a question like this on the exam, and if you do, I'll let you know well in advance that this will be a question you will have, so you'll have plenty of time to prepare for it. But the very first thing I think you need to do is what we did here, which is draw out this gross pay through September. Because if you've noticed throughout this video, we keep coming back to these gross pay numbers to make sure that we're hitting all of our thresholds and phase outs properly, that we're not paying taxes on something we shouldn't be paying taxes on, so that we make sure we get these calculations right. It's definitely worth taking a second, drawing this up, and having that information readily available instead of having to sit there and recompute this every time you work the question. So make sure you're not wasting time doing that. Okay? And in this question on number 12, since we assumed situation A, I've just drawn a line through situations B and C so that we won't get confused. Now, on number 13, what we're going to look at is, once again, we're still looking at situation A, but now it tells us to prepare the employer's September 30th journal entries to record the employer's payroll tax expense and related liabilities. So the first thing we're going to do is calculate how much of this all comes out. Well, you'll notice here on number 12, this was the employee side. All right, so the employee had this much withheld, and this is related to the employee in number 12. Number 13 is related to the employer. Now, we're going to take a second here and just point something out, and you'll notice the $93 and the $21.75 from the employee side, they show up again on the employer side. And that's because of something we haven't mentioned up to this point, but that is the case, and that is that the employer must match the employee portion of both Social Security and Medicare taxes. This is one reason why it's more expensive for employers to employ somebody than just the wage they pay them. And it's because they're paying an extra 7.65% of whatever they pay you to the government in FICA taxes. Right, this is 6.2% in Social Security, 1.45% in Medicare. And that'll give you the $765 total for FICA taxes. Okay, so that's one reason why it does get more expensive for employers than it looks like just off the cuff. Okay, so we're going to look at that. And so this piece is the same. Just like we credited FICA Social Security taxes payable, we now see that again, and we credited FICA Medicare taxes payable. We see that again as well. So no big changes here. So now what we need to look at, though, is the difference. And here, we actually have to deal with FUTA and SUTA. The employee does not pay these unemployment taxes. So we didn't have either one of these for my employee side. But for my employer side, they absolutely do have to pay these taxes, and that burden is put on the employer. This is another reason that it does cost more for companies than just your gross pay, because they're paying these taxes on the first $7,000 that they pay you. So it's just another expense that's going to go into that. So what we see here is the $6 for FUTA and the $54 for SUTA. So you say, well, now what? Right, I've got all these credits, I've got all these payables. So I've got FUTA payable, I've got SUTA payable. I've got my FICA Medicare tax payable, my FICA Social Security tax payable. Well, now what does my debit go to? And the debit here just goes to payroll tax expense. Okay, all of these are payroll taxes, and it is an expense. So the title seems to make some sense to us. So we're going to move on just a little bit, and that's going to be the end of the question. Okay? So now that we've finished the question, and we've finished the homework, now we just got one or two quick things to talk about. And real quick, this right here is what would have been on this General Journal tab. Okay? So hopefully that makes some sense. Now, what we're going to see, or what I would like to talk about real quick, is email. I've been getting a lot of emails lately, which is great. Okay, I do want you to email me. I do highly encourage it. I do my absolute best to get back with you as quickly as I possibly can. That said, it would really help me reply to your emails much more quickly and help you get a response therefore so much faster if you would only email me at this email listed at the bottom. This is robert.allen@sfasu.edu. Please do not use the email feature in D2L. If you use the email feature in D2L, you may not ever get a response. This is because I can't tell that you've emailed me through D2L. So whenever you send me that email, I respond like normal, but D2L is a closed loop. So since I'm responding from my MySFA email, which is where all of my email comes to, when you send me an email through D2L, D2L won't let that response go through. So I won't get an email telling me that response didn't go through for sometimes up to 2 or 3 weeks after I've responded initially. Well, 2 or 3 weeks later is not the time you need an answer. You need an answer that day or maybe the next day. And I tend to get back with you in that amount of time if you email me through this MySFA email, because it ensures that my response can actually go through. This does not mean you have to send it to me from your MySFA email. You can send me an email from Google or from Yahoo or Hotmail or whatever email provider you use is fine. It just can't come from your D2L email, because then I cannot respond. So do be careful about that. It'll help us make sure we're able to communicate as effectively as possible during this very chaotic time. But if you have any questions, always feel free to email me. I'm always happy to help in any way I can. And I hope these videos have helped.